Hello everyone, welcome to LewisFiction and welcome to Fixing the MCU Multiverse Saga. So I've already done this video before a few years back, but since then we've had a few movies release and a couple new ideas introduced into the Multiverse Saga. So working with those new ideas, how would I fix phases 4 through 6 now, streamline things up and make things a little bit easier to follow? Also, what projects would I scrap, which ones would I keep around, and how would I generally just improve this really dead period we've got in the MCU at this current point in time. The first thing that I want to address in my rewriting of the Multiverse Saga is all of that terminology that they've introduced that relates to the multiverse. And what I mean by that is that it seems like each film that tackles the multiverse invents a brand new consequence for the multiverse. Like in Loki, we have Nexus events. In What If, we have Absolut Points. In Multiverse of Madness, we have Nexus beings and incursions. That's not to mention anchor beings, which were just introduced in Deadpool and Wolverine. And I guess you could also throw canon events in there from the Spider-Verse films as well. So with all these different events and rules for the multiverse, it can get a little bit confusing. And of course, it can make plot holes. And when I tell you there are many plot holes in the Multiverse Saga, trust me, there are many. It all seems a little bit disjointed. You see, one of the great things about the MCU in its early days is that despite how different the characters were, there was always a through line. There was always a purpose to every story told and every character introduced. All of their worlds, whether it was Wakanda or Asgard, all made sense in the grander story. At some point, their world, their power set, and those characters became relevant in the right ways. However, in phases 4 and 5 in the MCU right now, all of these different characters, relevant or irrelevant, all have very different rules when it comes to the multiverse. For example, Deadpool and Wolverine does not feel like it exists in the same multiverse as the MCU, just because the thought of an incursion never appears to concern anyone, not even the TVA, who you would think would know everything about the consequences of characters from various timelines merging. Incursions were set up as a massive thing in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. However, since then, they've never really even been considered a consequence. There are so many plot holes when you really dig deep enough into these films, and I'm going to change that. So in my first move in fixing the Multiverse Saga, we're going to get rid of all of these rules and just start over. Instead of having multiple rules, I'm going to put in place one rule which is going to dictate every single film that happens within the Multiverse Saga to give a little bit of togetherness and make the films feel like they all exist within the same multiverse. And that is going to be Absolut Points. Now you may be thinking, why Absolut Points? They are probably the most irrelevant rule out of all of them. After all, they were only ever made relevant in What If, and that's not even a main timeline film. However, Absolut Points cover all bases pretty easily, and with only a few minor changes, all of the multiverse films in phases 4 and 5 will feel a sense of togetherness without changing the films entirely from scratch, which means you could have the majority of the character arcs, stories, and narrative threads quite easily by just changing all of the rules to be Absolut Points. Now let me explain. In Multiverse of Madness, Scarlet Witch turning evil will now be an absolute point of the MCU, and when Strange tries to confront this, he is met with backlash for trying to change something that cannot be undone. This then leads us to Loki, where we learn more about Absolut Points, and we also learn about how the multiverse came to be. Loki leads us to the first consequence of changing an absolute point. Up until now, everything that has happened in the MCU has worked around these absolute points, and then we find out from Mobius, these points are what make up the sacred timeline. However, when Sylvie kills He Who Remains, that dismantles every absolute point in the sacred timeline, causing the timeline to shatter. This then leads us on to Loki Season 2, where it all plays out exactly as it did. This then leads us perfectly onto Deadpool and Wolverine, where the TVA are trying to prune his timeline. Deadpool is having none of this and needs Wolverine's help to try and save his timeline and the people that he loves. Boom! One multiversal rule that binds every multiverse film in the MCU together, and and it works. And for those of you who are asking, this change does not affect Spider-Man No Way Home in any way. Now that we've fixed the multiverse ruling and made it easier to follow, let's move on to the elephant in the room, Kang the Conqueror. Now, of course, all the stuff happening with Jonathan Majors isn't ideal. However, I do feel as though the MCU is way too deep in with Kang at this moment in time to just end up forgetting about him. If you remember, before everything that happened with Jonathan Majors, Kang was meant to be the main big bad of this entire multiverse saga. So he's been built up throughout various projects like Ant-Man Quantumania and of course Loki Season 1 and Season 2. So you can't just forget about him and forget that he ever existed. However, keeping in line with the MCU's idea to replace Kang with Doom in Phase 6, there are only a few minor changes that we need to make sure Kang has a satisfying conclusion to his story, whilst meaning he isn't the main big bad for the next two Avengers films. So firstly, Ant-Man Quantumania will end very differently. Instead of Scott Lang beating Kang and returning home, he will be stuck in the quantum realm as Kang escapes into the overworld. Assuming in this new timeline we recast Jonathan Majors, this then leads us to a Young Avengers film which will round out Phase 5, allowing a natural resolution to be restored to the Kang story. Plus, this also gives us a chance to see a natural progression to all of the legacy characters that the MCU has made a big deal of in Phases 4 and 5, including the likes of Kate Bishop, Cassie Lang, Echo, etc. This also gives you a chance to bring back Wiccan and Speed from WandaVision as well. With Kang the Conqueror now out of the way, this gives you room for Doctor Doom to thrive in Phase 6 without anything else looming over him. And going forward, the Young Avengers could team up with the older heroes, including the likes of Spider-Man and the F4 as well, to take on Doctor Doom. Now that all the multiverse stuff is sorted, what happens to the other projects like the street level stuff? I think on the most part, it's all largely been okay. Personally, I would scrap the likes of Moon Knight, She-Hulk, Thor Love and Thunder, Black Widow, Secret Invasion, and the Eternals. There may be a few in there that I haven't mentioned that I've just forgot about, but at the moment, all of these different projects have no overall significance to the story. I would keep the likes of Echo, Daredevil, Born Again, Hawkeye, and the Spider-Man College Trilogy, since they will all likely play into the Kingpin story, and it also gives us an extra layer of depth underneath the multiverse stuff that's happening as well. However, these other projects that don't really tie into any overarching story, like She-Hulk is a major example, Moon Knight being another one, they're all just irrelevant, and I feel as though there are resources that are being wasted on shows like that can be put into improving already existing shows and already existing films that the MCU desperately needs to focus on. So one massive change I'm going to be making here is scrapping all of those shows and putting more emphasis on the street level story, which involves Kingpin as the main big bad. One last change that I also want to make is that even though I feel as though shows like WandaVision and other shows in early Phase 4 were relevant to the overall story of the MCU leading up to the multiverse stuff occurring, I don't feel like they needed to be shows. A lot of them, I feel like they could have been films, especially WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Speaking of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I feel as though that could have just been Captain America 4, and they could have had the actual Captain America 4 be Captain America 5 and a precursor to the Thunderbolts. So after all of the changing and reworking, I think my version of the MCU Multiverse Saga would look a little something like this. In Phase 4, we have Doctor Strange rounding it out, since his film is the major catalyst and major influence for the rest of the saga to come. Phase 5 is when the multiverse stuff really kicks on, and Kang looks like he's going to be the main threat. But that is then all tied up during the end of the phase, during Young Avengers, and it seems like something bigger was always on the horizon that the heroes didn't ever see coming. This then leads us up to Phase 6, where Doom is introduced in Fantastic Four, and the multiverse stuff all comes together by the end of the phase. That is pretty much what I would do if I was to fix the multiverse saga. Now, of course, I could do this to the more extreme. However, I wanted to take the ideas that the MCU had already put in place and work around them. I feel as though if the MCU phases 4, 5, and 6 were streamlined, more in the vein of what phases 1 through 3 were, I feel as though this is kind of what it would look like. Either way, let me know in the comment section down below, how would you fix the MCU Multiverse Saga? Make sure to leave a like on this video if you did enjoy. Make sure to subscribe if you are new. We're so close to 10,000 subscribers. Let's try and push for that goal. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care and keep telling stories.